I knew something was dead wrong the moment I watched two HOA patrol guys open my gate at 2 in the morning. One was filming my garage like scout for heist, while the other was measuring the gradient of my driveway with a rolling wheel as if they were planning a state seizure. And all I could think as I watched that grainy infrared feed was, and quote, "You boys just picked the wrong rancher to mess with," and quote, because 10 days later, those same men were in handcuffs at my gate while the sun set on. The most expensive mistake their association ever made. You see, if there's one thing you learn from living alone on a 400-acre spread in the Montana foothills for more than a decade, it's that your land talks to you. Not with words, mind you, but with signs, little shifts in the gravel, things out of place, a gate latch that feels a bit too loose. And if you pay attention long enough, you start to notice the difference between something natural like a deer brushing a fence and something intentional like a predator circling a kill. That morning, the land was trying to tell me something through the chill of the mountain air as I stepped out onto my porch with a tin mug of black coffee, following the same routine I've kept since I turned in my badge and retired from the sheriff's department. The air was cool and clean, the kind of crispness that makes a man feel grateful just to be breathing, and Scout, my old blue heeler, sat next to me with her ears perked up like she was waiting for the day to start talking back. I walked down toward the main gate, just stretching my legs when I saw them. Fresh tracks, sharp and deep, cutting a clean line across the fine gravel of my private access road. And I knew immediately they weren't an Oppos. T mine, they weren't an Oppos. T the neighbor's old Ford, they weren't an Oppos. T the UPS guy, and they sure as hell weren't an Oppos. T from any rancher around here, because ranch folks leave a certain pattern, narrower treads, mud stuck deep in the grooves, a little wobble from old shocks. Whereas these tracks were wide, aggressive, 33-inch mud terrains that looked like they'd never seen a day of real work in their lives. I crouched down, touching the loose gravel, and I could tell these weren't into Oppos. T from the night before. They were from dawn, maybe an hour before I woke up, and for the first time in a long time, that old knot twisted in my gut, not because I ain't Oppos, a paranoid man, but because even a bad GPS doesn't in Oppos. T explained why a vehicle would veer toward a locked private gate, slow down, circle, and then linger. I stood up slowly and let my eyes trace the snaking curve of my road as it dropped down toward the valley floor, where the Blackwood Crest subdivision sat like a cluster of beige Lego houses. A high-end HOA pocket of suburbia where people lose their minds if your trash is an inch out of alignment or if your lawn is a shade too lime green. And I knew their property ended exactly at the bottom of the hill, right where my black and white deed in the county registry began. So, what the hell were there in quote, pavement princess and quote, tires doing up here on my dirt? Scout sniffed along the fence line, her tail stiffening the way she does when something's been where it doesn't in Oppos. T belong, and I just stood there, breathing slow and steady, the way you're taught to do when a puzzle starts forming, because a few hours later, when I pulled the SD card from my gate cam, the puzzle turned into a direct warning. There it was plain as day on the screen. A white SUV rolling slow, and quote, Blackwood Crest Safety Patrol, and quote, printed in bold, official-looking letters across the door, and as I watched them creeping up my land like they owned the place, I didn't in Oppos. T slammed my desk or cursed the sky. My anger has always been quiet, cold, and focused. I just leaned back, stared at the paused frame of those two men, and whispered to the empty room, and quote, so that in Oppos, that's how we in Oppos, we're going to play this, is it? And quote, because those men had no idea they just started a fight they weren't into Oppos. T equipped to finish. Trouble rarely shows up all at once. It tests the door first. It checks the windows. It circles the perimeter to see if you're paying attention. And for 2 days, I waited for an explanation, a neighborly call, and quote, sorry we turned around in your drive, and quote. No, but deep down, the old deputy in me knew better. 2 nights after those first tracks appeared, the land spoke again, and this time it didn't in Oppos. T whisper. It was just after midnight when a motion alert buzzed on my nightstand. And while nighttime alerts out here are usually just a stray coyote or a deer, this one came from Gate Cam 1, the one angled right at the keypad. I slid out of bed, grabbed my phone, and opened the feed to see that same white SUV sitting inches from my gate with its headlights off, the faint glow of the dashboard illuminating two figures in dark uniforms with reflective patches that tried way too hard to look like law enforcement. The passenger stepped out, didn't an oppose. T hesitate for a second, walked straight to the keypad, and then, I swear my heart stopped for a beat. The gate just beeped and slid open. No forcing, no tampering, just a clean, authorized entry. End quote. You son of a end quote. I muttered, feeling that special kind of heat that hits you when a boundary is crossed by choice, not by mistake. And as I watched them ease the SUV inside, the camera caught the reflection of a card in the passenger's hand, a damn access code. Somebody had leaked it, or they'd hacked the system. But either way, they were inside my perimeter now. I watched the screen as they stopped halfway up my drive and got out. One carrying a high-end DSLR camera with a massive flash, the other holding a long, rolling measuring wheel. And as they shined lights on my barn and my garage, snapping photos like they were documenting a crime scene, the mic picked up one of them saying, and quote, "Slope gradient is definitely over 8%. Karen's going to love this. It's a total non-compliance liability." And quote, non-compliance. Liability. HOA language. The kind of regulatory jargon used by people who think set of bylaws gives them the power of a Supreme Court justice. And as I screenshotted their faces, zooming in on a heavy-set guy with a buzz cut who looked like he practiced his, and quote, authoritative stare, and quote, in the mirror, I realized they weren't an oppose. T just trespassing. They were in quote, correcting, and quote, I didn't an oppose. T go out there to confront them, even though every fiber of my being wanted to grab my Remington and end the conversation right. Then and there, no. That's what they wanted. They wanted an angry, and quote, unstable, and quote, rancher they could use to justify their takeover. Instead, I stayed in the shadows, let them finish their, and quote, survey, and quote, and watched them drive out 15 minutes later, locking the gate behind them as if they were doing me a favor. The next morning, I didn't an oppose. T drink my coffee on the porch. I was already in my old Chevy, driving down to the county seat with a flash drive in my pocket and a signed affidavit in my hand. I walked into the sheriff's office, a place that still smelled like stale coffee and floor wax just like it did 10 years ago. And when Sheriff Miller saw me, he didn't an oppose. T even say hello. He just looked at my face and said, and quote, Milo, you look like you're back on the warpath. Let's go to my office, and quote. I played the footage for him, and I watched his jaw tighten as he saw the HOA patrol opening my private gate. He knew as well as I did that they had zero authority past the subdivision line. And he looked at me and said, and quote, Milo, I'll file the report, but you know these HOA types. They're like termites. Once they decide they want a piece of wood, they don an oppose. T stopped chewing until someone pours poison on and oppose. And quote, I told him I had the poison ready. I just needed the law to stand back and let it work. And as I left, I sent a copy of everything to my lawyer, Sarah, a woman who handles land disputes with the surgical precision of a bayonet. 2 days later, the, in quote, poison, in quote, arrived in the form of a white envelope zip-tied to my gate, Blackwood Crest Homeowners Association, Community Safety Committee, and the letter inside was a masterpiece of arrogance, stating that my private road was now under, in quote, extended HOA oversight, in quote, because of its proximity to their community and its, in quote, hazard to emergency services. In quote, it told me I had 30 days to bring my road up to their, in quote, compliance standards, in quote, or they would, and quote, assume maintenance and assessment responsibilities, in quote, on my behalf, which is just a fancy way of saying they were planning to seize my road, pave it, and send me the bill. I laughed so hard Scout started barking. It was the kind of laugh a man makes when someone tries to steal the boots off his feet while he's still wearing them. And I immediately forwarded it to Sarah, who called me back in 10 minutes, sounding like she'd just been given a Christmas present. End quote. Milo, end quote. She said, her voice sharp as a razor, end quote. They just admitted in writing that they intend to commit a felony seizure of private property. Don and oppose. T say a word to them. Just let them keep digging the hole. End quote. And dig they did. The next morning, I looked out from my ridge and saw something that made my blood run cold. A brand new tripod-mounted surveillance camera sitting right on the edge of the property line, pointed directly at my house. Not hiding, not subtle, just a black eye staring at me. I walked down, looked straight into the lens, and gave it a very slow, very deliberate middle finger before walking back up to my barn to start my own project. I spent the afternoon making my own signs, official-looking, high-visibility engineering signs that read, and quote, County Infrastructure Survey in Progress. Authorized access only joint initiative, and quote. And I placed them just inside my gate along with a couple of orange cones and a fake motion sensor box that looked like a piece of high-tech government gear. It was bait, pure and simple, and I didn't oppose. Have to wait long for the fish to bite. That night, my phone buzzed again. It was them, Buzzcut and his partner, Thin Glasses. They'd come back to see what the, in quote, government, in quote, was doing on my land. And as I watched the live feed, I saw them step over the line, walk right up to my fake signs, and start panicking. Thin Glasses scanned a QR code I'd printed on the sign, a code that linked directly to the county's official land registry page for my parcel, showing my absolute ownership. And as he realized they were standing in the middle of a recorded, in quote, government survey zone, end quote, he looked like he'd just seen a ghost. They scrambled back to their SUV and peeled out, but the damage was done. They were on camera on my land after being served a cease and desist that Sarah had couriered over that morning. But the real kicker, the moment this went from a petty dispute to a criminal conspiracy, happened 48 hours later when a dull gray sedan parked at my gate and a man in a neon windbreaker got out with a clipboard. He had, in quote, County Infrastructure Inspector, in quote, iron on his back, but the letters were crooked and his boots were way too clean for a man who spent his life on dirt roads. He started rattling my gate, trying to look official, but I knew every inspector in this county by their first name, and this guy wasn't an oppos, one of them. I walked out of the trees, surprising him so bad he nearly dropped his clipboard, and I asked for his ID. He flashed a laminated badge that looked like it was made at Kinko's, and when I told him I was calling Sheriff Miller to verify his badge number, he didn't oppose to even argue. He just ran. He sprinted back to that sedan and tore off so fast he fishtailed into the ditch before recovering. And when Sarah ran the plates that afternoon, she found out the car was registered to a holding company owned by the husband of Karen West, the HOA president herself. End quote. They're impersonating public officials now, Milo, end quote, Sarah said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice, end quote. They've crossed the line in a felony territory, end quote. But Karen wasn't oppos. Done. She was a woman obsessed with the, end quote, aesthetic, end quote, of her hill, and she wasn't oppos. Going to let a, end quote, stubborn rancher, end quote, stop her from completing her vision of a paved, controlled paradise. The following Monday, I got a call from Hank, my hay hauler, who sounded like he was about to have a stroke. He was stuck at the bottom of the hill because 2 HOA patrolmen had set up actual barricades and orange cones across the mouth of my road, telling him he couldn't oppose. Deliver my winter hay without a, end quote, commercial transit permit, end quote, issued by the subdivision. I didn't oppose even grab my hat. I just jumped in the truck, clipped my body cam to my shirt, and roared down that hill like the ghost of Christmas past. When I got there, I saw it, a full-on illegal checkpoint. Karen West herself was standing there in a pair of designer sunglasses, holding a clipboard like she was a general at the border, and when she saw me, she actually had the nerve to smile. End quote, Mr. Flynn, end quote, she chirped, end quote, we're just conducting a safety audit for the heavy machinery entering the Blackwood Crest Buffer Zone. It's all for the good of the community, end quote. I stepped out of the truck, the body cam blinking red, and I walked right up to her until she had to tilt her head back to look at me. I told her very quietly that she was currently committing kidnapping by way of unlawful restraint of a commercial vehicle, and she just laughed a high, tinkling sound that didn't oppose. Reach her eyes. End quote. Oh, Milo, end quote. She said, end quote, nobody's being kidnapped, we're just regulating. You should try it sometime. It brings order to the chaos, end quote. That was the moment the siren started. Faint at first, then a low-frequency rumble that vibrated in your chest. And as 3 sheriff's cruisers and an unmarked SUV swept around the corner, Karen's smile didn't oppose. Just fade. It shattered. Sheriff Miller stepped out, followed by the county prosecutor, a man who doesn't oppose. Like his Monday mornings interrupted by HOA presidents with a God complex. And as they walked up to the barricades, Karen started stammering about, end quote, community sovereignty, end quote, and, end quote, safety easements, and quote, the prosecutor didn't oppose to even look at her. He looked at the barricades. He looked at Hank's blocked truck, and then he looked at me and said, and quote, Mr. Flynn, do you wish to press charges for the illegal obstruction of your primary access and the impersonation of county authority we've been documenting? And quote, I didn't oppose to even have to answer. I just pointed at the body cam. The next 10 minutes were the most satisfying 10 minutes of my retirement. Watching the deputies dismantle the end quote, checkpoint and quote, watching the heavy-set patrolman try to hide his face, and finally, watching the handcuffs click shut on Karen West's wrists as she shrieked about her rights and her husband's end quote, connections and quote. They found the end quote, inspector and quote, windbreaker in the trunk of the HOA SUV, along with a notebook that detailed their plan to harass me until I sold the land to a developer they'd been in talks with. It wasn't an oppose, just about a road. It was a land grab, a cold-blooded attempt to force a man off his heritage for a bigger view and a fatter pocketbook. The court case was a bloodbath for them. The judge, a woman who'd grown up on a ranch herself, didn't oppose to have a single ounce of sympathy for a quote, group of suburbanites playing soldier on a neighbor in oppose as property and quote. And by the time it was over, Karen was looking at a year of probation and 500 hours of community service cleaning up the very county roads she tried to fake authority over. And the Blackwood Crest HOA was ordered to pay me $60,000 in civil damages for harassment and trespass. I took that money and built a new gate, a massive iron beast with a keypad that only 2 people have the code to, and I put up a sign that doesn't oppose mention the county or the law. It just says, and quote, I've had a long career in law enforcement. Don and oppose made me come out of retirement. End quote. Now, things are quiet again, the way they're supposed to be. The land is talking to me in whispers of wind and the sound of scouts snoring on the porch. And every time I see a white SUV down in the valley, I just take a slow sip of coffee and smile because I know they're looking up here and they know exactly where the line is. But it makes me wonder, how many people out there are dealing with these, in quote, miniature dictators, in quote, in their own neighborhoods? How many folks have lost a piece of their peace because someone with a clipboard thought they were king? I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand your ground against an HOA that thought the law didn't and oppose apply to them? Or have you seen someone lose their home to these kind of tactics? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. Because sometimes the only way to stop a termite is to show him you're made of solid steel. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you think Karen got exactly what she deserved. Until next time, keep your gates locked and your eyes open.